we talked a little bit on the panel, or a decent amount on the panel, about what the game is and what it does, and but I think I want to get a little bit. Maybe we'll just zoom out and just talk a little bit about how the game is constructed. So
Sure.
you've got these three types of cards, right? Like we've got.
I've got some in front of me too, so I'll look at them.
Cool, yeah.
Refresh my
You want to
memory.
show us? We've got blue ones, orange ones, and green ones. What are those about?
Yeah, so when I first started, again, I kind of started this design as just a tool for myself. There's no really a way to practice modular other than just patching. So it was kind of all around this context of wanting to practice and get better and kind of get out of my usual habits and muscle memory of patching. So the original idea was just these sort of jumping off point kind of cards to force me to either some of them were like a goal, like FM drum patch. Some were just sort of general starting frameworks like Krell patch, or things like don't use any attenuation. Like I started to try to think of ones like what are things that I never do, and let me write those down, and I'll start with that.
Sarah, what's the Krell patch? Because
okay.
It is a very famous concept that I know a little bit about, and I watched this old movie from the 60s with Leslie Nielsen in a serious role.
Mm-hmm.
People don't remember.
Funny.
He did the airplane movies.
Yep.
Yeah, but he was a serious actor in the 60s, and this movie was kind of just okay, but the soundtrack was amazing. It was this husband and wife team. I think last name was Barron, but they came up with this patch. And what's the Krell patch?
So I don't know if the person I learned about the Krell patch from is Todd Barton, who's a veteran synthesist. Exactly. Yeah. Very heavy on the easel, the 208 knowledge, and there is a very similar patch from the easel manual. It's like one of the last pages or patch examples where the easel and the 208 have this concept of a card. It's basically like you can attach resistors and stuff to this PCB card and then plug it in here, and it's basically like a preset recall for most of the controls. So in the manual, it's describing this, patch card, and it's very similar, but I think Todd just took it a step further. And it's basically like an auto-playing patch. The I think sort of key parts, to not take forever to explain it, is you have random voltage controlling pitch, but also envelope attack time and decay time. So, and I think the speed that the sequencer goes through, the sequencer could be involved or not involved, but it's a relatively straightforward patch, the core of it, so it's really expandable, but it creates such an expressive, like almost vocally sound, because every note has a slightly different attack and or decay. So you might have, it sounds like a person playing a real instrument. It's incredible. And to me, it became this really early way to practice and sort of find these tones that I wasn't getting naturally. It was just sort of showing me, the instrument was showing me what it was capable of. And also just sounding very, very musical. Even with, random voltage going to the pitch, it still was very expressive and expressive sounding. So it was something I liked to do, and I wasn't sure everyone else liked to do it. So it was, something I thought to, share or whatever. It turns out it didn't make a great card, but
build a Krell patch.
Yeah, just because it was like, well, if you don't have an envelope that you can modulate the attack and decay, you kind of lose a huge part of it. It meant having to try to redirect someone somewhere, like, all right, now you have to go Google what a Krell patch is, or there was a bunch of aspects of it to where when it was no longer just an idea for me, the Krell patch card, it kind of had more problems. So I'd love to try a way to shoe it back in. But so you were asking about
sort of big one, like the to make a Krell patch card, it's sort of like asking the person, like, make a patch that's significantly complex that it can think for itself.
Yes, exactly.
Basically build a sentient robot in your modular system.
Right.
And and then come back to me when you're done.
Yeah, exactly.
Good luck.
Which is good, but over time, as I started to play test it, I found that like those sort of bigger goals didn't work as well for what I was trying to achieve. So it was like um, I wanted a way for those abstraction cards to be able to be combined into multiple ones. So that one kind of got trickier. I wanted them to be sort of smaller elements. So every time you played it, it potentially had a very different impact. Where it was like, okay, if it says Krell patch, you're always going to be building a Krell patch. It's going to, they may be different, but it's still a Krell patch. So, but that was the kind of idea of where it first started from. There wasn't card types. It was just, like a deck of ideas or, sort of inspirational jumping off points. And then as I kind of refined that of like, okay, well, maybe these jumping off points are like a little too specific. It needs to be something a little more basic and simple, but still challenging or kind of out of left field. And I think the first one of that kind of style was the use no attenuation one. I was like, okay, this is a good example of like what I'm thinking about. It isn't a specific type of patch. It isn't a specific type of sound. It's just a framework or a limitation that is, yeah, exactly. Something that I think most people, certainly I didn't do very often, and most people weren't going to do, but it has some really interesting results because you typically don't, patch an envelope to the pitch input of an oscillator, say, and not attenuate it.
Yeah.
And I had definitely used, synthesizers before where you may not have the ability to attenuate a certain input, and you're kind of just left to, deal with it. Like it may have a cool result, but you got to now tailor other aspects of the patch around the fact that this thing is going to be modulated full amount. So that was the first one of like, okay, cool. So this card type should be around aspects like that. And then as I started to develop those more, it was it became clear that it was still easy to kind of fall back and like the first couple times you play the card, maybe you've learned something or you sort of stretched your muscle memory kind of thing, or found a new path that you hadn't found before. But now quickly you'll go back to those paths. It's like, I've played this card's come up before and I did this cool thing. I'm going to do that cool thing again. So it's like there needs to be something that now shakes it up during the course of patching with that abstraction or abstractions. And that's where the idea of these disruption cards came from. And that was the first one, was they were disruptors. And as I was designing these different disruptors, I realized, well, there's these kind of like, positive or like easier disruptors, or things that evolve the patch more. And then there's the ones that are like these heavy duty, like this is getting in your way to kind of like really push you kind of style ones. So I was like, oh, maybe it makes sense to have two card types. One thing I really thought about a lot when I was designing this, again, once it became more of like designing this for everybody and not just me, was I wanted to make sure there was no one way to use the cards. Everyone's got different tastes. They got different ways that they, work creatively with music or with the modular. And I never wanted to force anybody into a certain way of using it. And it's like, and even for myself, like I wanted to be able to have it be flexible. So, one idea of that was like, well, let's say someone doesn't want to use any disruption. They just want to use the progression cards. They could do that. Like let's take out the ones that are like really, really disruptive. Like one suggestion is when you're making the draw piles of cards, you have your abstraction draw pile. And normally I recommend shuffling the progression and disruption cards together. But if you wanted, separate them. And then you could choose as additional level of choice of going like, oh, now I want to do a disruption. Let's see what that's going to do. Or like, oh, well, maybe I really, really like where I'm going, but I want to keep playing. I'll just draw progression cards. So
okay, so in the game then, sorry to go
no, it's fine.
More basic on this, but in the game we initially start out with these 9 abstraction cards, and these blue guys basically are going to tell the user where to start, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, in fact, I should just back up and kind of explain the basic game is what I called it. I kind of wanted to come up with the intro way to play. Is sort of like a suggested, should work for everybody, and it's fun.
Yeah.
You start by drawing one of those 9 abstraction cards, and it's like a framework or a rule to structure your patch around. We've mentioned a couple: use no attenuation. use gates as modulation is a fun one.
That's very cool. Yeah.
One, it was also an early card, is something that I would do a lot as a way to challenge myself, which is create an entire patch without listening. So that's basically patching, without listening to the results until you're kind of done with the patch, or at least a certain degree in to where it's like time to listen to it. It's actually a really interesting one that really kind of shows you what your muscle memory is, because without listening to it, you're going to go back to imagining what things are going to sound like.
How deeply do you understand your modules?
Kind of, yeah, exactly. Or not deep, as sometimes the case may be. It's just sort of like, oh, here's the modes, or here's the way I know this really well. I know what that sounds like, and that's what you end up doing. So the abstraction becomes this sort of rule starting point. I like to call it like a framework.
Yeah.
And they tend to be limitations. Just because I find that really helps creativity, like a limitation. But rules tend to also be limits. So it kind of works that way. And then, so once you have your abstraction card, you start patching based on that. And then at some interval, I suggested 5 minutes, you draw from the shuffled together progression and disruption card stack, and then do whatever action that card says. And most of them ask you to choose a module or choose a connection. And I use that word choose because I wanted to have it open to the players to have a controlled level of like randomness. So choose could be just look and you pick, which is totally fine. One way I really like doing it for the sort of most random kind of game aspect is to kind of number the modules around your case in a circle or a grid or whatever, and roll a die or a random number generator. And then that particular, if it's like, oh, it's 12, okay, module 12, that's the module that I need to do this action against. So this one says patch every connection.
The numbering is interesting too, that you have, there are a few things I want to talk about, but I have to be diligent in trying to make sure that we get across the 3 different card types in the basic game. So we start with the abstractions, and you patch under that framework for a certain period of time. And then when you decide you want to introduce something else interesting that isn't coming from your brain, that you want a little more help for something, then you would draw one of these orange or green cards. Now,
yes.
And now the orange ones are disruptions, and the green ones are progressions. You seem to have numbered the disruptions first and then progressions. So are these two seem to be sort of in the same category, right? Like they happen at a similar time in the basic game.
Yeah, so the basic game, I suggest a 5-minute interval, but like you said, it could be whenever you feel the need for like inspiration or to be kind of led a different direction. I always sort of struggled with, will people have a hard time with a game that has no rules? So I try to make up the rules, or it's kind of like you deciding how to play them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where the basic game came from, was to sort of like, all right, well, here's a way to kind of like showing a way to play the cards. It's kind of like the most general. It uses all the card types, and kind of an inspiration to go like, hey, maybe, you, the player, now have a tweak on how to play this. On patchtcg.com, there's a link that says ways to play, and I include a couple other alternate ways to play that I like, that I came up with. And I'm hoping eventually, like, as more people start sharing what they're doing, as people come up with other new ways to play. But yeah, so at a 5-minute interval is the way I suggested it, but it could be whenever you want. You draw, again, I suggest shuffling the progression and disruption cards together into one draw pile. But again, if you wanted to separate them so you have that much more control, that's also totally fine. Draw a new one and then do the action on that card.
And then behind those categories, progression and disruption, should we sort of take those names at face value, where
a little bit?
Yeah, progression should move things forward. Disruption should kind of mess things up in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, they'll both kind of pretty heavily mess things up, and it kind of depends on the what controls you choose and things. Like a progression modulate the clock rate. That's gonna pretty throw things for a decent loop. but it's not interrupting your signal flow. I mean, other than I guess patching the modulator to this, unless you just do it by hand. Whereas the disruptions tend to be about patching things or unpatching things. So the idea was kind of like the disruptions are more of a disruption. And again, when I designed these, it was just one category called disruption. But I was finding that I was designing some of these cards that like are not super disruptive, like swap attack and decay times, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It no longer felt like disruptive. I mean, maybe from a literal sense it is, but not to the level of like unpatch all your 1 volt per octave inputs, you know? So
Yeah.
it started to be clear that there's sort of like 2 levels of disruption. And a lot of them sort of fell into this. And again, I think I was maybe taking a little bit of inspiration from Magic the Gathering here, where they have these different card colors and they have a different flavor. Whereas like the black card type tends to be more of the like dark magic, and it's more around creatures dying or things like that. And then the white one is more around like angels and light magic, and it's healing things. So I think I took a little bit of that, whereas like the progression is sort of the nicer ones or the easier ones, and the disruption ones are a little more like the nastier ones. It's not so super set in stone, but as I was developing these, that flavor kind of just naturally came out.
Yeah, well, and I wanted to kind of segue into talking about the words that you chose for these cards as well. So I put together a thing that a lot of people who know me in Frequency Freaks, they know I like to make a lot of charts and a lot of Excel spreadsheets for things. I just find it helps me understand. So I'm going to
because you mentioned that, and you mentioned the card numbers. So they're numbered in this order just because when I put them in a spreadsheet, those were just the numbers. So the numbers are there really just to reference the cards. It'll make sense when volume 2 is out. I wanted a way to be able to say, card 7 rather than say the card that's named, use every cable that you can. So
Yeah.
Oh shoot! Oh man, if I knew you were doing that, I would have just sent you my.
I'm sure you have it too.
No, but yours is much nicely color coded and organized, and
well, yeah. So this is sort of how I understand this game when I was prepping for this this interview, and the panel was, okay, I better just look at all the cards, write what's on them, and I apologize to viewers if this text is too small to read, but just gives you the concept of the colors. You've got 9 abstraction cards, and then you've got 8 disruptions, and then you've got 8 progressions, total of 25 cards. And I just tried to write down a little bit about complementary techniques, things suggested on your website and elsewhere. Cards that might pair well with other cards, either before or after them, and other connections or observations. So I can just share this.
Cool.
Yeah, well, I can share this with you and with the community, and
Sure.
maybe we can all work together to fill it in. As you can see, I didn't finish it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, like, use this as a kind of springboard to talk about the verbs that you used. And it's great that you mentioned you were kind of unknowingly segueing into what I was going to talk about, with using and choosing being the most prominent things that you do in Patch the Card Game.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that right away when I will try and share. I'm going to stop and then share a different file. Let's see here. So what I did was I took this grid, which you saw on screen before, and I tallied up I'll show it one more time. So I took this grid and I took the main operative verbs on each card. So create, choose, use, start, all of this. And then I tallied up how many times are those used as operative verbs, right? And so then you get a frequency, like how frequently do you use these main verbs on your cards, okay?
Oh, that's interesting.
And then I thought, let's do a fun kind of late 90s marketing team experiment and do a word cloud.
Cool.
Yeah. And so what I've got here is a quick word cloud that I did. And let's see.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so we've got all the main verbs that happen on each of the cards. And if for people that don't know word clouds, where have you been? But for a quick refresher, the size of the word corresponds to how often it shows up in your deck of cards. So as we can see, using and choosing are the most important things in across all the types. But then we've got flip, start, modulate, create, unpatch, turn. I find that with the progression cards, we get the most variation on the main verbs. So with tune, swap, modulate, create, I think turn, these things to do with either adding things together or changing parameters, those all happen in the progression side of things. So I guess to try and turn that into a question,
Why are these used? Yeah.
why? Yeah.
Well, one thing that I definitely took from, because I was always really interested in how Magic the Gathering was designed, because it's such a deep game that's been running for so long. And they design a new set, multiple times a year. But it was clear that they had created these very specific like mechanics and a language, so that like players kind of understood when they hear a word that they know what that means. So it's not like you have to read every single card and really, it's like, you know what I mean? Like you hear, okay, that word is used, that means this thing, to the point that they even have these sort of meta ones where, a certain word, like flash means you could play the card even on someone else's turn, I think. Something like that. So I wanted to have a consistent language, one, so that, it wasn't difficult to understand the purpose of each card, and the rhythm of reading them was going to be similar. So it was just easier to understand.
Like you're not going to break out your thesaurus for the word choose. You're just going to keep it simple.
Exactly. And that the actions would be kind of consistent. You're choosing. I mean, use kind of just sort of like there wasn't a better word, and I was trying to keep these brief, because I wanted the text to be large enough. I didn't want it to be tiny. So the phrases had to be short-ish. But choose, I knew, was definitely going to be the major one. And also part of it was I wanted to have a consistent sort of vocabulary, because originally I was imagining, so backing up, I wanted to have the art on the card really inform what the card did. So after, a couple weeks of playing this game, you shouldn't even need to read the text anymore. You know that picture. Again, something that I took influence from Magic the Gathering has art on these cards, and you kind of can know, oh, I know what that card is from the picture. You no longer have to read the card every single time. So I originally kept thinking like, well, we'll have, an icon for choose. Maybe there's another icon for patch and another icon for something else. So the idea would be, we wouldn't have to design a unique icon for each thing. There was an icon that represented a word in the action phrase.
Mm-hmm. And those are fantastic icons. I mean,
oh yeah, Nathan. Well, that was funny because when I talked to Nathan about that, he was like, I think I can make, like I'd rather do a unique piece of art for each card. Like, wouldn't that be better? And I was like, well, that would be better, but dude, that's at least. I kind of knew that I'd like to do at least 2 volumes. Like that's 25 to maybe 50 unique. I mean, I was having a hard time even imagining how you do some of these icons.
Yeah.
Like, how do you use every cable you can? But then when he designed that, it's like, well, not only does that look awesome, but that's perfect. Like, so. I'm not a graphic designer, and my brain does not work that way. So,
we talked about the word language, the textual language, but there's a very interesting and consistent visual language to these cards too. That if you're that kind of learner, some people learn better with text, some people learn better with pictures, and both are just so on point with this game.
Yeah, and I think like in our conversations, or it's just something that Nathan, is a natural at, this, idea of keeping things in a consistent way. Things are sort of shown in this circle, but then sometimes the circle, so like the circle is sort of the view window to the icon, but then sometimes that circle is a part of the icon. But I mean, even using consistent things like arrows, there's even little details where it's like, this is talking about unpatching. So you see there's those little breaks in the arrows, whereas this is talking about patching all the inputs. So there's no breaks. Unpatching is breaking connections. Unpatching the volt per octave. You can see there's the unpatched logo again. It isn't like an immediate thing. You see arrows, right? But that's actually a unpatch, icon
It's
arrow.
like a tuning fork.
Yeah, one's unpatching essentially your pitch inputs to your VCO. The sort of idea of a consistent language was one about making it just sort of easier to understand, and also for me for designing. Like I don't want to design like 20 different like ways that you're going to have to do stuff. It's better like it's like, all right, it's just about choosing, and then the player can decide the method they're going to choose. I mean, I also try to use words where you have the ability to maybe do it differently each time. So again, like choose, again, you could just choose without any kind of additional intervention or guidance, or you could be rolling a dice, or you could be tossing a cable and seeing where it lands, or like
just different ways that you can implement choice.
Exactly. So that means anytime there is a this card, choose, you could choose a different way, and the sort of target module, the module that ends up being chosen, is in theory going to be different every time. So this one card, every time it's played, is likely going to have a different result. So, and that was key to this design. Like each card should not have a like, oh, when you play this card, you're going to end up doing something to the filter, or you're going to end up doing something to the whatever. I wanted each card every time it's played that the result is going to be different, not possibly different, but definitely different.
And so you've got the basic game here, just to quickly summarize in, if I'm giving my elevator pitch as to how patch DCG is played in a basic way, start with an abstraction card. After 5 minutes or a period of time that feels right to you, shuffle together or maybe do this before you start patching, but shuffle together the progression and disruption cards and draw from those and see what happens, and simply repeat until you feel you've had enough, right? For the basic game. But then you've got a bunch of game variants listed on your website, and I'm really interested in those because some of them even include like multiplayer elements where multiple people with decks can get together, and not so much in COVID times, but I mean, maybe over a live stream or something, or a Zoom meeting, but or if everybody just masks up and gives it hell.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the like this idea, obviously it started well over 2 years ago now. So it was definitely pre-COVID. And I, imagined people getting together, playing this in stores, or synth gatherings. One of the fun multiplayer ones, Patch Battle Royale, is kind of like a patch challenge. It's 2-player, 4-player, however many people. You could just use one deck, or you could use 2 decks, but it works totally fine with one deck of cards. And the idea is you play one or multiple abstractions, but those are shared between all the players. So, let's say it's every cable you can and Gates's modulation. So now everyone who's sort of participating in this has to follow these. And then depending on the number of players, you deal out shuffle the progression disruption cards, and then deal out, if it's 2 people, I think it's 5 or 6 of those cards to each person. And then again, at some interval, let's say 5 minutes. So everyone starts patching. Every 5 minutes, you pause and you play a card from your hand. Now, the fun aspect of this is you can play the card on yourself, or you could choose to play the card on somebody else, like a very specific person.
Like there's attack and defense.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
I also like that it's abbreviated PBR, because it reminds me of that really excellent beer that
exactly. Have a couple cans on hand when you play.
Yeah.
But yeah, I played that with a few friends who helped me with the early testing, before COVID, and it was really fun. And so that was one I always kind of imagined, and certainly works on a live stream. If you kind of have someone who's going to be the card master, so to speak, or has the cards to kind of direct everyone, it totally works over a live stream. Obviously you got to have your audio, and of course the end, you kind of just patch until all the cards are played, and then everyone performs their patch or kind of auditions it or shares what they did, and you just kind of choose. Like we used to. I usually played 2-player and we just kind of argue over who had the best patch, but it really isn't about winning in that aspect. You could make it a certain way. I sort of imagined if it was done in a shop or something, maybe there's an audience and the audience can vote, whatever. The goal is in the journey, not so much the destination. But yeah, and like again, one of my goals with this was that it could be used in many different ways. I didn't want it to be like, this is the way you play it, and that's that. Because I knew even for me, at some point, maybe I get tired of playing it that way. So, and once it became an idea of like, selling this to other people to enjoy and get benefit from, it's like I don't want it to be where like someone doesn't even want it because they don't want to play in that aspect. So, at the most bare bones, the way that I've used it often is I just, sitting down a patch, I'm just using my modular, or maybe I'm writing music, and I just shuffle together just the progression and disruption cards. And then when I just sort of feel like I need to switch something up, I just look at one of them and just do what it said. And that's it. Like if that's all you do with the deck, you're still using it 100% the right way. Or one of the other variants I have on the website is called arbitrary strategeries, which is a combo reference to the 90s Will Ferrell, George W. Bush strategery.
That's one of my
joke.
favorite impressions of all
Isn't
time.
it? Oh my God, it's so funny. But also sort of a nod to oblique strategies. And the way you play that one is you don't even use the progression disruption cards, unless you want to. But the way I do it is I just usually take 3 abstraction cards, draw 3 of them, and use that combination. 2 is also fine. Just basically more than one. And the cool thing with that is, I did the math on this once. There's 9 of these, so there's like 86 or something, unique combinations of 3. So there's a lot of different. So like even if all you ever did was that, you only ever use the abstraction card, there's at least 86 different sort of challenges for you to patch against. And then if you were to then throw in progression disruption card play while you're patching those, who knows? Every one of those patches is probably going to be different. So that's another fun way to play where maybe you don't want to have cards telling you what to patch and unpatch, but you do want a challenge or an exercise. 2 to 3 abstraction cards will really like show you a lot of what modules are capable of, because I really try to design these that are like a step out of a comfort zone. One that's kind of a goof, but actually is really fun once we started playtesting it is start patching with your least favorite module.
Yeah.
The goof there is it's the one that's not in the case. But everyone's got one. Everyone's got a module that's like not their favorite or one they don't really use that often. Start with it. It's like that's the core of your patch. You have to start with that. And it often does kind of what the whole game of the goal of the game is, which is to really show people the full capabilities of their system. Especially with so much choice in the Eurorack world, it's really easy to just go like, oh yeah, that's the module I use for X, or that module is really good for Y, and that's what I use it for. When they have lots of different features and functionalities, because there's always something really cool to add to the system. We often don't have or don't spend the time to like really figure out all the things possible. Or sometimes just there's this aspect of like, oh, that input is for gates, so that's what you patch into that. But what happens if you patch a smooth random into that? Does it do anything? It might, or vice versa. Envelopes, all those kind of things. What happens if you patch audio into the clock input, just like audio from a drum machine output, just sort of things like that. So there's that aspect is sort of baked into the abstraction cards too. Another really fun one, which I found useful, especially when I'm not sort of sitting down to practice, like I'm actually creating some music with it, is a game variant I called patch decomposition. So let's say you've made a patch, you've recorded, oh, sure, yeah. Let's say you've done a performance, whatever, you're done with a patch, you're going to tear it apart. Well, rather than tearing it apart, grab patch TCG, shuffle the progression and disruption cards together, and then draw 10 random ones, or just draw 10, and then do them in whatever order you want. Just do all those cards, unpatching, patching, and then what you're left with is a new patch that's been sort of decomposed from the patch you were just going to tear apart. And that one's really fun because it's, doesn't really like get in the way of a creative process for someone who's like, look, I've got my creative process. I don't need cards to help me. It's a really fun way to take like what was going to be something you're just going to tear apart, and evolve it into something new.
Yeah, it's sort of like recycling, or
Yeah.
like the reclamation process.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of where the name is sort of like a play on, actual composition, but also something decaying and decomposing.
To be planted back into the earth, to
exactly right,
and birth something else beautiful.
I've several times playtesting done this, and actually redone a performance or a recording where the decomposed patch was more interesting than the one that I had just previously been working with. So that's a really fun one. The one right below that, auto patch, is kind of just the inverse of that. So starting from scratch, again, just using the progression and disruption cards, and doing them in order from scratch, auto generating. I mean, you have to manually patch it, obviously, but what you're patching is determined 100% by the cards. And that's a fun one. And it could also be just like the place you start. That could either be the final patch, or that's, where you're going to start from. And again, these are not set in stone. These are kind of just like ideas. I've definitely played auto patch where that's like my starting point. And then I draw some abstraction cards, and then I start taking it from there and playing like, more of something like the basic game from that. So, it's really like I tried really, really hard to make sure the cards themselves dictate the actions, and they don't need a framework or like a game framework which to be used. So you can kind of use them any way that you see fit. Like if you just want to draw one random one and do it, that's fine. If you want to structure it into this, game format where you've got rules and times that you do the actions and stuff, that's also great. But my goal was really that like these could be used like a modular, really, like anyone could use these in whatever way that fits their, creative process the best.
Yeah, well, and there's a real connection between the cards and modules as well, in the sense of their interoperability, and they're all interoperable, but they are also all possible as standalone creative engines. You could take a single, and I think you might have mentioned this earlier, so sorry.
No, in fact, the way you said that was actually a much better way than what I was trying to say just now. They essentially are, autonomous. They could stand and exist on their own, but they also combine together. So like that was a very specific, sort of design criteria.
Mm-hmm. And that's sort of similar to the Buchla and Surge approach to making modules. Like we started the discussion on sort of like all of those modules, like a function generator, and the closest analog in Eurorack would be maths, or any of the Surge by random source modules. So you have these modules that are super open-ended, where it's like a function generator. It's basically saying something something starts and then something stops over and over again, and just from that concept of on and off and how we get on and off is like, I don't really know where I'm going with that, but I think it's just this idea of everything can either stand alone or work together.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But yeah, that was definitely, and it was really kind of interesting because that was a goal in the beginning. But sort of as I was designing things, that also kind of, it just kept reinforcing itself. So each new thing I kind of discovered worked really well would reinforce, you know, more of the design, which would then kind of reinforce another part of it, you know, almost like sort of cooking something down to an extract kind of thing. Um, and then once I kind of had that sort of overall design, and then it was just about refining and playtesting the cards, and making sure that you know, I'd think of an idea that fit the design, and then it was like test it, play it, you know, make sure there's, you know, it doesn't kind of fall down either, it doesn't combine well. I mean, there's some that don't combine perfectly, like use no modulation, and then, you know, modulate only using your hands. Like that's not
Yeah.
perfect. And with those kind of things, I mentioned in the directions, if anything kind of feels like, I called it a no op, like a no operation, or sort of like a dead card. Like the one that can come up is, you know, you're choosing randomly, and you roll the dice, and let's say previously you played like something that had you unpatch all the connections to a module, like unpatch that module. You know, card later or two, you roll again, and it chose that module. It's like, okay, well, I can't change the knobs on it or anything. It's not going to have any effect. So it's just like, just repeat it, just do it again. Inevitably, there's going to be something where, because it's so random, or can be so random and sort of open-ended, that, you know, there could be an action that doesn't make sense or has no effect. Or even if you see something like in the stream where Michael was mentioning, like he'll roll his dice and go like, oh yeah, that doesn't sound like that's going to be good. That totally can come up with patch. Like it's going to have you do something really gnarly. If you just don't want to lose what you're doing, you don't have to follow it. It's fine. That kind of level of like sticking to what it says versus using that as creative inspiration, again, is something I really wanted to leave open to people. So the real goal isn't so much to play a game as it is to, you know, get better and learn more about your modular. Not just to make it, you know, make it hard. I mean, I wanted the learning part to be fun, because I feel like most people learn better and it sticks with you when it's fun.
Of course. Yeah.
And, you know, it's more fun to learn when you're having fun. So, you know, the idea wasn't just to make patching really hard or challenging.
Yeah.
So if anything, like, you know, if it's going to make you unpatch your output module, you can kind of skip that one. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
But getting nothing sometimes can be interesting, but
true.
also is necessary, because if you're just getting these constant hits of gratification from it all the time, it's like candy or something. You get sick of eating candy every so often. Sometimes you want to just eat an apple to balance it out.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or have something bitter to balance it out. And I think about like scientific experiments where some of the most interesting results of experiments done have been what they call null hypotheses, where the result is nothing, and then the experimenters go, but wait, that should have been something. Why was that nothing? And then they learn something new about the components, you know?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. So getting nothing, it doesn't always suck. Yeah. But you know, I think we could talk a long time more. And you should probably come up to Toronto at some point when
That
traveling
would be awesome.
again. But I think here, maybe just to end it off, where can people get their hands on a Volume 1 deck?
So right now, if they're in the US, they can order direct from patchtcg.com. Also on patchtcg.com is the current dealer listing. Right now for Canada, my only dealer is Nightlife Electronics in Vancouver. But I would love to have more stores, especially like on, you know, the eastern half. I really want people to support their local stores with this too. Again, like I always kind of imagined this being a community-based kind of game where people, you know, went to stores to play, or just, you know, met up with other people who play, any of that kind of stuff. So I really would love to have local stores carry it. So you know, anyone in Canada or even anywhere who's watching this, just let your local shop know, like, hey, I want to buy this through you. I'm happy to work with, any shop, and I can get them stock as quickly as possible. I'd love for people to go through their local shops. I do know that Modular 8, who's listed there, they're here in Portland, and they're set up to sell, anywhere out of state and shipping out of state. Signal Sounds, I think, can do almost all the EU. Yeah, so there's
in there too. That's cool.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, in fact, they were one of the first people that reached out. It was really, really cool. I was not prepared in the initial launch. I had 70 decks on hand from the very first sort of test run where we were, sort of finalizing the box, and had a minimum order of 100. So I got that original 100, and I thought, okay, this will give me, maybe 2 weeks for like the sort of big order to come in and everything. And those first 70 went in 24 hours, and then that was just, is there anything you guys could do to ship it faster? Can you print half of them now and just ship those instead of the full? But thankfully they were able to arrive before Christmas, and I was able to get most of even to like the dealers in Germany and stuff for before New Year's and everything. So kind of worked out, but I sort of learned my lesson there.
Cool. Well, yeah, and I mean they're quite affordable. This deck, I think I paid 25 US.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a reasonable price for the amount of creative, for the wealth of creativity that it'll bring out in your playing, I think.
I really wanted to make it affordable. I know for like a deck of 25 cards, like $1 a card, seems like a lot when you think about the cost of playing cards. I did make sure that there's extremely nice quality, card stock and coding.
People need to think about the development cost though too as well, like the time put in and the care and the thought put into the words, but also the graphics and how they all fit together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I definitely paid Nathan for his amazing work on these. I mean, for me itself, it was kind of a passion project. So I wanted to make sure that when people were paying $25 for a deck of 25 cards, they were getting something that felt good, that played well, that wore or wears well over time. If you're careful with them, they should like last for a really, really long time. I mean, anyone who's into card games, there's always card sleeves and stuff, but these are like casino level quality, if not slightly better. It's not quite like
fantastic. Yeah.
It's not like trading card game stock, which is essentially just like, very, very gentle paper that wears away right away. And I wanted to make sure that you didn't need to have card sleeves for these to last a long time. I mean, I even went so far as to like try several different coatings that the printers offered with different lighting. Like I really liked this heavy gloss coating, but if there was any lights overhead, it was just so much of a glare that it was like, oh, now you can't read it. That's not going to work. Yeah, I mean, a lot of effort was spent on kind of all the details, the look, the feel, how long it wears for, how it feels shuffling, dealing, all that kind of stuff. So I hope everyone really feels like they are definitely getting their money's worth. And again, like a huge goal was like, you should be able to play this over and over and over again, and it shouldn't get old.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great spot to call it for now.
Cool.
For information, I think the best way is probably patchtcg.com or at patchtcg on Instagram. Any other ways that you would like people to interact with this?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is always awesome. Using a hashtag made with patchtcg or just patchtcg. I try and remember to repost and share all those things, and just at the very least, so I can see them. It's been so rewarding seeing people come up with these really awesome patches from this. I mean, for something that was started as an idea just for myself, so I could improve, it's just been really rewarding to see in other people's hands and seeing what people do with it. So I get a lot of enjoyment, out of that aspect of it, just seeing what people come up with.
Yeah, well, and we'll as these cards just stay out in the market longer and more volumes are released, we'll see just all the interesting synergies and results that come from them. So I can't wait to see how the world receives these, or the modular world anyway, receives these into the future. So thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, it means a lot that you spent all this time with us, and
Oh, absolutely.
stay safe.
Likewise.
And keep making tools for us to create like this, because we really appreciate it. So
awesome. I will.
yeah, all the best.
Thank you. You too.